feels like a community family gathering that we're at today. And those words of Jill have set a very beautiful tone. I would I think what I'll do is I will introduce Mia and Brynn after I read a few poems as the transition. And the way the reading will be structured today, just so you all know, is that we each have a set of slides that we're going to talk about before we do our reading. And our reading is meant to be a conversation about the notion of Day of Remembrance, Japanese American experience, and the intergenerational inheritance of the incarceration. We are all younger generation members of the Japanese American community who did not directly experience the camps. The purpose of our reading today is really to show you the ways in which that trauma, that history becomes not just a part of sort of chronological experience, but a part of psychological processing and therefore, connection to one's present day life. In terms of this recent book that Jill spoke about, Seize, Seize, I do want to give gratitude to my mother, Renko Ishida Dempster, who is in the audience today. Her artist name is Sui Ren, and this is a painting that we chose after many, many iterations and conversations that when you look at it, you can just imagine all these sort of symbolic representations or connections. And many of those do appear in the book. Some of those might be blood or a forest or fire, the idea of clouds, and also the idea of a brain that is not at peace, a brain that needs to be calmed in terms of epilepsy. Okay, Jill, next slide, please. So I thought it would be helpful for you as an audience. My dear friend Jill and I have known each other for many years, but some of you have not necessarily met Brendan. And, this is a photo from many years ago. And no, I did not dye my hair. I'm just a little bit younger. But there I am holding Brendan on the stairs of our family cabin in Kenwood, which sadly burned down recently during the fires. And so I'm so happy that we were able to take this picture. This is me and my boy, and this is before he was diagnosed. This is me just holding him and, just being grateful for having this lovely son, Brendan. Okay, next. This is my grandfather, Oji-chan, and he appears in Topaz too. In Seas, he is also a figure in terms of connecting my father-son experience with Brendan to the past. And in one of the poems that I will read forthcoming, you will see that there he is in his Buddhist garb, the Kesa, and this is what he looked like before and during the giving of services. He would chant the Lotus Sutra, the Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, and I believe this is in front of the actual church. That's what it looks like to me. Okay, next slide, please. And then this is his wife, my grandmother Obachan, and obviously my mother's mother. And she is in some traditional Japanese wear as well. She, I would say, is the glue and anchor of the family. So while my grandfather was a community leader and he was the head of the church, she kept everything running smoothly. She was a poet herself, an accomplished one, and also talented in other Japanese arts. I think there's one more. Is that the last one? Okay, so this is Mia. So perhaps, Jill, during the reading, we will go to speaker view. Is that what we're doing? And then I will be sure to introduce Mia. So what I'm going to do is read two poems from C's, and they're both from the first section. And after speaking with Mia and Brynn, I thought it would be helpful for all of you to read the opening poem. And it's short, and I think it sets the stage for the book, which is really about, Brendan is 16 years old now, and this book spanned pretty much his whole life in terms of the writing of it. So this opening poem, I think, is this notion of what is the expectation as a father, and then what is the reality as a father, and then what might be the reconciliation. It's called Night Sky. At his birth, I held my son against stars, charted the climb, his flag among stars. A jagged pulse shook our space, his mind a blizzard of stars. I keep it quiet how he sees earth crooked, his words buried stars. So later in the section, I thought, obviously, since Day of Remembrance had happened February 19th, which you're all familiar with, I was having a really nice email conversation with Brandon Shimoda, who's here today. And we were sort of discussing this idea of Day of Remembrance is not enough. Brandon made the great point that, within the media and the way it's constructed, we remember this for a day and then that diminishes. And while that is very important, I think that a week of remembrance, a year of remembrance, a daily remembrance is probably more authentic because it's always with us, right? So I think this poem, Truce, honors that. And remembering the photos of my Oji-chan and Oba-chan before, and knowing that my mother was a baby at the time the incarceration happened in Topaz, you will see these figures interspersed into the narrative of the father and son. The poem is called Truce. Some days we are bombed harbors, then silence. Other days I speak, my voice a snake, cursive in deserts, a father and son, two countries, flags whipping in wind. I know the words I need to whisper, words keeping us apart. My shirt twisted in his fist, he tugs at me. Back turned, I shake him off. My torn sleeve a white cloth he holds up. Shots fire from my mouth. Stop. Tell me what you want. Words in our own war story that he can't answer. My son seized, ancestors trapped. Grandmother walks on boards, carries my baby mother over mud and horse shit of Tamfran. Wraps her with blankets in topaz, their sand prison. Images sizzle in his eyes, light forking the sky, mother blinks. Like my son, she doesn't know the words. Bedtime stories, a nightly clash, my hands guiding his head, forcing him back to the page. Rain on tin, hum of songs, her father missing. Empty deserts, shudder of flags, the mouth and its silent dust. Between quiet and the noise, I reach the edge, almost surrender. So we have a father-son journey in the narrative of Seize, this idea of physical, medical seizure then gets linked to historical and racial seizure. And that to me is my own discovery of how the present informs the past and vice versa. My friend Mia Ayumi Malhotra writes beautiful poems about I would say the mythic presence of Japanese American women, and then also creates characters. Isako, her book right here. You're about to see it as a slide. Was published by a wonderful independent press, Alice James Books. And Mia is an award-winning poet. She is one of the editors of Lantern Review, a very important and impressive journal of Asian Pacific American writing. I also know that in addition to her poetic talents, she is very giving to the Japanese American community and a great mother. So, I hope, Mia, you don't mind me saying that I think of you as a sister and a friend, and that really, really very honored to be reading with you today, and looking forward to you now telling us about your own relationship to incarceration vis-a-vis the past and the present. So please, virtual applause for Mia.
Thank you so much, Brian. That's so gracious of you. I mean, you feel like family too, and actually serve to bring my biological family closer together in a way through your work with the community. And it says my internet connection is unstable. Am I okay? Can you hear me? Okay. These things happen, right? But as I was saying, it's such an honor to be celebrating the launch of this book, such a tremendous book. And I hope that some of you have a chance to read the more extensive conversation that I had with Brian on the Lantern Review blog. I think that link will be available at some point, or you can just search it yourself. But I've just been astonished by the depth of Brian's consideration. You heard some of it this afternoon just now, but how deeply and carefully he's considered all of these linkages between family history, sort of medical condition, cultural history, cultural trauma, national history. There are just so many ways that I think as a community we owe thanks to Brian and his work. So this is just a really special opportunity, I think, to come around this book and to welcome it into the world. And so I'm going to open actually with the poem that appears first in my book, Isako, because it's an homage to, the title of the poem is To My Many Mothers, Issei and Nisei. So it's an homage to them, which includes, that stunning picture of Brian's Obachan. And I loved what he said about the way that she held everything together, because that rings true to me, the stories that I've heard about the matriarchs in my family, some of whom appear by name in the poem I'm about to read, and some of whom, are just sort of held in that figure of Isako, who I imagine to be, all of the female ancestors who have given rise to us. And something I actually wanted to say before I go further is this poem, it names the mothers Issei and Nisei, but I also want to acknowledge the Sansei women among us, because they're the ones who have cared for, at least my generation, I'm Beyonce, who have cared for us directly, and they've carried us with so much of the same and tenacity and inner resolve of their mothers. And I think we care for others the way that we've been cared for, right? For better or for worse. And I feel that this is more and more true as I grow as a parent. I think I've become more and more attuned to my inheritance, my mothering inheritance, as it's been passed down through my mom, but also, I look to my aunties, I see Auntie Marge and Auntie Eiko here, the ways that they've been mothers to me, kind of in a spiritual and cultural sense. And I don't know. I wanna acknowledge them as well. Um, and share this poem with you. So thank you so much all for taking time out of your Sunday afternoons to join us in remembering what has transpired and what's happening in us right now, and also to look toward the future as well. So this is to my many mothers, Issei and Nisei, just to bring them into the room. Praise be to beef liver stew, to gravy biscuits and home-baked bread, to women in work pants and suspenders who worked like dogs in the packing shed, up to elbows in rose clippings. You fed us well, O goddesses of goulash and green beans, of Sunday dinners wrangled from the coop. For penny money and seamstressing, praise. For parsnips and sweet potatoes, praise. Even for the years lost to sharecropping and strawberries, hallelujah. You worked until the final hour, then rose 3 days later, baby squalling on your hip, back to breaking canes, clipping hooks, hustling the men through lunch hour. No breaks, boys. Hallelujah to Pond's cold cream, to curling rags and church bento socials. Praise to the nursery truck, revving in the morning, the clank of steel pipes and boiler house rumble. All glory to the Berkeley streetcar and Keyroute electric train, the smokestacks of Richmond and foggy peaks of San Francisco. And because they're what taught us to praise, glory to the roses run wild, the packing shed left to cobweb. To crowded horse stalls and half-built barracks of Aurora, Arkansas, dusty sheets and muffled nights of Block 99C, 100, Sakai, Chu, 102, Sakai, Ruby, 103, Sakai, Causeway. Oh, praise to the camp midwives, the Nisei girls shooting hoops and swatting birdies when their mothers weren't looking. And to the college-bound co-ed who crossed the country, camp release papers in hand, hallelujah, her truth marches on. And that was my grandma, Shigeko Sakai. And I think there's a slide that maybe Jill can bring up for us. And it shows a snapshot. I think it's the next one. Yeah, this is the family nursery. So that's my great aunts, my great grandmother, my great uncle, doing the work. It was backbreaking, and I think this sense of family all working together, it's changed as the nursery business has given way to other kinds of family business, but family remains so much at the center of life. And so the next two poems that I want to read as we, continue in this vein of remembering, honoring, and also sort of taking stock, is I'd like to read these two poems. I think maybe they're a part of a larger project, because as I was preparing these, I realized, oh, these are both family notebook poems. They've got family notebook in the title. Maybe I'm working on a series. Sometimes it's hard to know what you're doing until after the fact. But this first of the two is a family poem, and it happens in the present moment. And the occasion for the poem is an encounter with the sea, and the sea as this sort of great timeless expanse. I think, at least for me, the seed of the poem came from a meditation on what it meant to be looking at the sea. And I was on a family vacation in Pajaro Dunes, and I mean it felt really significant because my family moved to Southeast Asia when I was a kid, because my parents were involved in development and mission work when I was growing up. But it's like, history kind of branched there, because if they hadn't moved us overseas, I think we were going to move to another nursery property, and I'll have to do my research and ask the family. Right? we were going to move potentially to a property that was either in Watsonville or close by. So I would have, grown up by strawberry fields. So anyway, this poem is just a meditation of, that branched history and what it means to respond to a family life that in a way encompasses, the past, the present, gestures toward the future, but how through it all we're held in, the great cycle of time, even with the many displacements that Brian has talked about so eloquently, how, we still remember our way, which is the last poem, or the last line in the poem. So this is Pajaro Dune's family notebook. The sea's hungry here, the sand so fine, it clings to the face. Clutched in the fist, it spills through, falls away like powder. I'm reading about the schizophrenias. Out here, my mind's its own kind of wild. We crowd in the car, drive through streets of what could have been haute enchilada, hairs on, the freeze-dried taxidermy place. My mother murmurs in the front seat, the unborn child, the lost sister, gone. And me born in the shadow of their passing. Here's the story of the life I never lived. Sandy loam, strawberry fields, rows of berry brambles, and plump to bursting tartness, seagrass, and coastal fog. Sometimes they talked about it. You would have loved her. But mostly there was this sense of a soul slipped off too soon, lost before it had much life to live. The sea lays a wet stain on my mind. Where do we go to meet our dead? Where can we find the lost? In the measured wild of the taiko's throb, its bachi-bachi beat. Every year, the drum staccato punctuated by shouts, the pulse that holds us all dead, living, lost, and found. I hear it in the pounding surf as my mother chases the spray, kite twirling overhead like a hurt bird through air. The wind's swift kick, and she's a child again, hurtling across sand. Your arm remembers the feeling, she says. That's something you never forget. So true. We've been lost before on this distant shore, but still remember our way. And if we can go to the slides again, I apologize, I'm jumping back and forth, so this is the last one, I promise. But I do have some photos on the next slide of the Obon Festival. So those are my two daughters there. They were younger then because that was pre-pandemic, but now they're 7 and 4, and they were just so impressed by the taiko drums. And I think there was something so deeply felt about, and that was the first time I think that they'd been to an Obon festival, and that was the first time that they encountered drums like that. And I felt so glad to be able to welcome them into the circle. And so anyway, there's one more slide also of some of the strawberries that we actually did pick on that family trip. And there's my daughter in the background, very excited that they're all the strawberries she could ever imagine picking available to her. But I think a combination of those experiences gave rise to that poem. So those are the last of my slides. I'm still finding my way on this Zoom-based presentation. But the last poem that I want to read is another family notebook poem. So it's called Perseid's Family Notebook. And this is actually one that I wrote for my brother. I saw the name Paul on the list. I don't know if that's my Paul or a different Paul. I hope it's my Paul. But I wrote this poem for their wedding, which was a COVID era wedding. And I thought to share this because Brynn got married, and we didn't get a chance to celebrate as a larger community. And I thought, well, a wedding poem that explores what it means to pass from one sort of season of life into the next, and to have, you know to have the witness of the larger community, of the ancestors, of those many mothers, right? Because they're with us right now, I think, and they see. I thought, I think this is the poem I want to bring. And there's reference to a starry cathedral, which of course is like literally the Perseid, the meteor shower that my brother and his wife timed their wedding around, because that's something of great significance to them. But the starry cathedral is the name of a quilt pattern. And my mom actually spent ages piecing this quilt together, and I feel like that's sort of a lost art in a way. I think, other generations would get together and like quilt together and give quilts together from the women of, of the church, like this beautiful collective. And something like this. I don't know how to quilt, and I don't know if I will learn. Maybe this is like a note to myself to learn. But anyway, there's an image of in my mind of my mother, holding this quilt, the Starry Cathedral quilt, and offering it to the new couple. And I was just thinking, what that means, that there are those in our lives who are present, in these liminal moments of passage, where we're kind of unbecoming. You have to unbuild in order to build, right? But what it means, that there are these figures in our life that are present in those moments, and making these offerings to us. So my mom is like gifted enough to make a quilt offer. My grandma, she was very gifted at offering advice. So one that I'll share with you all today, my cousin already knows this. She would say, you can let all of your fingernails, like you can chew them, do whatever you want, but don't bite the fingernail on the point of your finger or the thumb, because you need those too. I don't know. That's just one random thing that popped to my mind. She was full of advice. So some offer quilts, some offer advice. What I have are poems. So this is my this is my offering. But anyway, that's a long introduction to a short poem. But this is Perseid's family notebook, and it's for Paul and Katie in celebration. Summer's long, drawn-out spectacle streaks across the sky. We huddle under August's last quarter moon, a starry cathedral unspooling overhead, holding the patchwork of our lives. In early morning, a woman fits the pieces of a quilt together. A mother bakes a pie. Somewhere in the Oregon dark or faint glow of California hills, a family readies for the day. We are mere witnesses to our lives, so much smaller than we think. Moments lost in the maze, nothing ahead as far as the eye can see. No map to speak of, just an uncertain orb through space. How the hedgerow grows toward itself, reaches into emptiness to fill the gap, to make a home from nothing. What it means to be held, to hold, be healed. How a person can become an old truth, familiar as a pair of wool slippers. How brave you must be to live it, this life you've chosen. The heart, a known comfort, a place to come home to, blanketed in dark. Thank you.
So I think I'm the MC, but I would definitely welcome Mia to jump in after I do some words of introduction to Brynn, since you two know each other as well. But I will start by saying Brynn is a longtime sister, okay? Now, by long time, I think we figured out we met each other in 2014 at the AWP conference in Seattle, and we had been corresponding over email before that. And I had a good feeling about this Brynn. I thought, she'd been recommended by Tina Chang, a friend of mine, as a great poet and student. And indeed, when I met her, she was a radiant, shining spirit, and her poems matched that. So you definitely have to check out her first book, The Palace of Contemplating Departure. What a great title and cover. And this was winner, I believe, of the Benjamin Saltman Award and a finalist for the Northern California Book Award. And then her second book, Power Made Us Swoon. Can you see that? Also, continues some of the themes of that first book, and they were both published by Red Hen Press. Brynn is a professor at California State University, Fresno, and also does this incredible thing called a Beyonce Memory Project. I hope I have that right, Brynn, which Mia and I and Jill were involved in several years ago, where it creates these intergenerational connections between, Nisei, Issei, Sansei, Yonsei, Gosei, and continues that conversation about camp intergenerationally and resettlement. Brynn is one of the most lovely person you'll ever meet, and I truly mean that deep from my heart. I'm so happy to have her as my friend and sister. I would like to pass it off. Mia, do you want to say any words about Brynn as well? Because you've
I,
known each other for a while too. Yeah.
I would love to. Um, I also met Brynn at an AWP conference. I think we were in Boston, but I think just by way of context, that's one of the like larger literary conferences that happens in the country. And I also had this feeling about her, but mine was more like she feels like I might be related to her. She feels like my cousin. I just had this feeling of deep warmth, and I sensed a deep generosity of spirit, and felt immediately at home in her presence. We were at I think it was a Kundiman reading. So there were a lot of, I mean, that's like the home of Asian American poets at this large, overwhelming conference. And then meeting Brynn sort of in the midst of that was just an added gift. And I think, I mean, I met Brynn before I knew that I could actually commit to a life in poetry, and she was already doing it. I met her pretty fresh out of grad school, I think. And I mean, she met with me for coffee. We talked about what it means to hold these histories and to write from them and through them. And I think that was probably the first conversation I'd ever had with someone who shared the lineage that that I can now sort of stand in. And so I guess if we're using family terms, I think of Brynn as like my elder sister, because everywhere I aspire to go, she's been there, and she's kind of cleared the path, and I feel really grateful to be, I don't know, receiving some of what she has for us today, and y'all are in for an amazing treat. Brynn is an incredible voice and an incredible soul, and yeah, her poems say it all too. So really, really good.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I felt like I was about to get like roasted there or something for a second. I'm like, we should be roasting Brian because we're celebrating his book. But that was so generous and sweet of you both. I remember reading both of your manuscripts early on. I know Isako came out just a couple years ago, I think 2018. And then I remember reading Seas many years ago, an early draft. And so this is so special to like see these books living and hear you read from them today, and to have this beautiful community with us of friends and family. And thank you to Jill and J-Sei for holding this space for all of us. This is such a special reading, such a special afternoon. I guess I'll show the couple slides first to start. I just had a couple images to share. and then I'll read my 3 pieces, and then I'm going to hand it back to Bryan. That's the book cover, which you saw. You could go to the next one, Jill. These are my grandparents, my father's parents, Mitsuo and Alma, and they were incarcerated at Gila River. And I think on, Day of Remembrance, of course, thinking a lot about them. And with Mia's poems, thinking a lot about the strong women in my family through the generations, including my Korean American grandmother, Marilyn. My mother's side is, Korean American and Japanese American, very different stories of World War II. And just the kind of divergence of those paths has been interesting to reckon with through the years. So I love that idea of kind of calling in the ancestors and the many mothers today. And you can go to the final slide. This is an image of a chapbook I put together that has one of the poems I'm going to read. And then next to that is an image of my dad at Gila River. So one of the pieces I'll read references the pilgrimage my dad and I took a couple summers ago to Gila. That was the first time we had visited the site of incarceration of his parents. They actually met, his parents met in the camps. They were about 22, 26 years old when they were incarcerated, and they met and fell in love there. And this sketch by my student Manny did this sketch from a photo out of respect for the Gila River Indian community. As many of you know, Gila and Poston were located on sovereign territory, and Gila is on the sovereign territory of the Gila River Indian community. And out of respect for that land, we didn't take any photographs or didn't share any photographs. We took photographs, we just don't share them publicly. So, but they allowed sketches. So my student did this sketch based on a photograph of my dad. Okay, so with that, I will read my things. This first poem is called February 19th, 1942. I think I may have memorized it. I'll try to do it from memory. And February 19th, right, is Day of Remembrance. It's the date that the executive order was signed that authorized the incarceration of our community. And this poem is just a short little poem thinking about my grandmother and the way time really isn't a linear thing. I think it's kind of a cyclical, circular thing. February 19th, 1942. Moon across the sky in the purple morning, dry earth unfurling. In another California, my grandmother is packing everything she owns into one suitcase, 2 suitcases. The water still in the clay pitcher, water unwasted, only what she could carry. There is no moment in my life in which this is not happening. What is happiness? 2 granddaughters in a summer garden and grandmother laughing. There is no moment in which she is not alive and rising, imbuing these hills, this morning sky with shadows. I realize now I actually messed up the line, so maybe I shouldn't do things from memory. So I'm gonna read this next one. So the garden is an image that appears often in my poetry, and this poem references my dad's garden. He's got this amazing garden he's been working on for decades, and it keeps getting more and more extensive and beautiful. And this is a letter I wrote to my father after our pilgrimage together to Gila. And if you visit the website for the book, which I can put in the chat in a little bit, the website for the chapbook, you can see his reply. My dad wrote a reply to this letter. So you can read that online. And he read it aloud at the launch event as well, which was very moving. I was very proud of both him and my mother got up there and read their poem letters at this event. So that was amazing. So this is just Dear Dad. There's a new way I see the garden now, the one you've been tending for decades on Garden Avenue of all names, the street of our family home. In haiku written by former camp prisoners, days and seasons are tracked by the falling leaves of the moss rose, petal to earth. Poets in camp numbered months and years by the memory of their home gardens left behind on the West Coast, flowering rhododendrons and peony buds imagined as remaining firm. I think of us traveling that week in the summer of 2019 away from California along the train's course through Arizona and onto Gila River. How far I brought you from your garden. Did you think of the sagos, the summer tomatoes and basil, the azaleas and red maples, the night blooming lantana, trees needing trimming, grass going brown, all of the work awaiting you? Did you imagine the dogs chirping and the silent white bucket and mom dragging the hose across the lawn to wake the fountain? Here in the Southwest, I find myself pining for the great Central Valley, as I did when I lived in New York or that decade by the bay, exhausted from cold bridges and colder waters, longing with my entire body for the landscapes of childhood's kingdom, smog dust, and all. I understand now I am nothing. I am the daughter of a living father, blessed to be returning to you. After our fire and ice travels through North American landscapes, spotted by our elders' lives, their prison desert homes, and other jails and prisons, with and without bars or barbed wire. You were not taken. In the night and shirtless, you were not captured or broken by the century's light, despite my nightmares. You took your time in the summer garden, where Lee and I played as the light set, basiling our bodies against mosquitoes and baking mud sweets in California's sugary dusk. Dad, your voice is wise now beyond kindness. I'll see you soon. I made it. I made it through. I made it through. I think my parents are on the call, so thanks. Thanks, Dad. Be sure to read his letter. Read my dad's reply. And this last poem I'm going to read is it's a huzzle, and I think Brian, your poem Night Sky was an intentional huzzle, right? Yeah, that was okay. Did that on purpose. So that poem Brian started us out with, you heard that word stars repeated. And that's kind of the form of this poem. It repeats a word every other line. So in my poem, you'll hear the word shelter repeated. And these were co-written with my poet friend Tracy Brimhall, and this is a new poem. It was written, it's a pandemic poem. And so Tracy and I, as we were choosing these words for the huzzle, we thought about words like distance and shelter, quarantine, etc. Just these words that are really alive right now. I think that's all you need to know about this poem. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to Mia and Brian for your amazing poems today. And Brian, you're gonna close us out with a couple more. And I want to dedicate, speaking of getting married, that's true, I did get married. And my husband, who may or may not be the Dave on the line, we're not sure, is that my Dave? Is that my Paul? Who knows? It's his birthday today. So he has been certainly been a shelter for me during this time. As so many people we love are shelters right now during this wild moment. So this poem I'll dedicate to him today. It's called Huzzle That Tries to Hold Still. Morning rises like an obelisk. Where does stone find shelter? The girl I remember plays in her father's garden a shelter. Clouds opal the morning, bees make the flocks tremble, sparrows sing in me as if I were a redbud, as if my arms were shelter. The ash trees and orange blossoms stand still in the midday sun. Without you, I feel closer to my body's pain. Absence shelters. Wet nose on my arm wakes me, the dog's metronome of joy. Only yesterday, the howl chorus of the shelter. Have you forgotten the magma churning at the earth's core, the animal in us? Rain wakes the sweet bays, the sky shelters. Like the snail, but not the slug, not the opossum, but the armadillo, or the turtle's famous comforts. Sometimes the body is a shelter. Early evening, the sun in its thin gray veil. Dog asleep on the sofa, all bellies full. My mind's skullbone, an uncracked shelter. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And I'll pass it to Brian, pass it back to Brian.
Wow. Gorgeous. So I'm going to close this out with two poems. They feel right for the moment. And before I do, I just want to say to Mia that this idea of the gender and the matriarch and the power of Japanese American women comes through so beautifully in that catalog of the first poem. And then in the other two poems, the idea of the landscape becoming a character, I think, is very powerful. The landscape is not passive, but instead has agency. And there's a way in which family and experience, landscape becomes a lens through which to understand those things. Very beautiful. And Brynn, this line of there is no moment in my life in which this is not happening. I'm paraphrasing what you said, maybe even word for word, but I think that's almost like a thesis statement for the ways in which incarceration lives in us as younger generation. And your poems just beautifully and gracefully are not just about summary, not just about informing, but are about the ways in which history lives in us, literally. And the ways that you write the poems show that. So in these final pieces, and by the way, before I read them, we want the sort of to break into a conversation with the audience after these final two poems. And certainly me and Brynn are welcome to also say some words, but we want it to be very interactive, the closing part. So the final poems I've chosen, really given this group, this idea of a sutra. Many of you have some sort of faith, whether it's Buddhist, Christian, or other. And I wrote a poem for Brendan called Sun Sutra, S-O-N, Sun Sutra. And I will read that first. Boy of stars, sun inside, fallen without a sob. Rest against me, bending sunflower. Still the flutter, ease your head, sun. It's late, no way to before. Your skull shadowed and sunlit, churn, deepen us with your shadowed words, muted sun. Say dad after me. Your scattered sun petals are sutra, nightfall. I gather you, my bruised sun. And Jill, there is a slide for I just want to show them before I read the final poem. And I mentioned the cover is a painting by my mother, Renko. Well, there she is. Isn't she lovely? And she's with my son, Brendan. And I thought a nice way to close the reading would be to really connect the generations, not just the immediate ones, but she's the grandmother of my son, Brendan. And the final poem I'm going to read is in her voice, speaking to Brendan about the ways in which her history informs her past, but also how that also will inform him, even though he's nonverbal. What is that connection and how can that be expressed? So I'm just going to finish with this. It's called My Mother Watches Horses with Brendan. Through the fence you look out. their hooves breaking new earth, sleek fur, the shade of bourbon, kicking up clods of green. I wheel you closer to shaken ground. Grandson, at 10 years old, you point at them. Once I thought you said the word horse. Someday I'll paint you the story. Topaz rain galloped over roofs. Barracks thundered. We were the ones corralled. My hand's on your shoulder. Your hand taps my wrist. Look, they are flying over crests of hills, running into the sky. Go far enough, speak what you can. There's love in silence. All things, they come and go. All right, everyone. So I want to thank Jill for putting this all together, and Mia and Brynn for their lovely work, and to all the family, friends, students, community members, and fellow writers with us today. And Jill, with this, I'll hand it over to you. Do you think we should open it up to the audience for Q&A at this point? What would you like to do?
So I'd like to bring Brynn and Mia back.
Yes.
And we can, there we go. So this would be a great time for folks to go ahead and write some questions or comments in chat to, that you'd like to share or you'd like to ask to our poets. And maybe you guys can start by having a conversation. Just take a pause and
Well, yeah, that's a great idea, Jill. And so as, you know, questions populate into the chat, I would like to hear from Mia and then Brynn, because that was the order in which we read. And I've already said some words about both your work. I think that, you know, today, our intention, you know, for those of you in the audience was really to not only show the ways in which we are informed individually by this history, but to create a conversation amongst our poems and amongst our work, right? And so, Mia, I'd love to hear from you just about, you know, any thoughts that you have in terms of today and, you know, you as a poet, the conversation of Japanese American poetry in general.
Yeah, I appreciate your making this space because it's been such a journey of discovery, I guess, because I mean, I alluded to this earlier, but I was raised overseas in first Laos and then Thailand, and so I wasn't a part of a community that, I don't know, that understood or remembered this history. And what I've learned, you know, since moving back to the US is that, you know, there are a lot of folks, even if they grew up in the middle of, you know, a Japanese American community, that doesn't necessarily mean that they were hearing these stories about these. I think my experience isn't that unique to just me, but I think my way into all of this, you know, has of course been the stories that were passed down, you know, by my grandmothers before they passed on, or letters that they wrote me, or records that they kept, things like this, and also the meticulous family histories that sides of my family have been amazing about keeping. I mean, that's been one layer of it, but I think the ways in which our history has been opened up to me and like a live, I guess spiritual is the way, like a way that my soul feels like it can like integrate that. It's actually been through your poems, the both of you and others that we know who are thinking and feeling in this same poems. I mean, I think of course of Brandon Shimoda, and I mean, we were all gonna present on precisely Todd Kaneko as well, and there are other poets I can think of who share this history and are also feeling into this work. But I think it's kind of strange in a way that, you know, the folks that I feel are leading me into this are people who, like me, weren't actually, you know, weren't in the camps or didn't experience these moments, and whose relationship to it is in some ways, if you look at history as like this linear thing, as distant as my own, but really, as Brynn has said, you know, like time moves in these cyclical ways, and something that feels so present to us might have happened very long ago. And I think your poems all add up to me as live, and that line that Bryan, you pulled out and paraphrased from Brynn's poem about there's no moment, you know, in which this is not happening, that contains such deep wisdom, I think, for me and for all of us. I'm really grateful for you too.
Wow. That's, you know, as you spoke, Mia, you know, I don't know how many of you saw the description for the event, but one thing Jill meant, you know, she had included this, that a year ago, Brandon Shimoda, who's here today, had organized this notion of the first ever, to my knowledge, Japanese American poetry panel at a conference, and Todd Kaneko was also part of this panel. And so we are all so excited that we're going to meet each other and present similar to today, but with all five of us. And so in some ways, right, this reading today is, you know, some way to relive what would have happened. And there's this great thing that Brandon did where we all wrote a piece about imagining what that would have been. I think it's called The Afterlife. And so you all can look that up. We all wrote a piece, you know, in honor of that. The other thing, right, is this idea of we pay homage to, you know, Wakako Yamauchi, Hisai Yamamoto, Garrett Hongo and David Murrow were big influences on my work early on. And we write out of that tradition in history, right? But at the same time, like with Brandon's work and Todd's work and Brynn and Mia's, there's this idea that we're trying to move the conversation into the direction that honors our experience, right? While at the same time drawing from tradition. So Brynn, with all that in mind, we'd love to hear your thoughts about the poems today. You as and Brynn is half Japanese, half Korean as well. And so there's this mixed race heritage that we share, but in different ways, because I'm half Japanese, half European American. But Brynn, your thoughts?
Yeah, I really loved, Bryan, the way you juxtaposed the life of your mother when she was a child, and then thinking about your son, and, you know, Mia's poems that were sort of the way you were talking about thinking about parenting and then reflecting on your parents, or the ways in which yeah, history is just this living thing. It's so alive. And Brandon's framework of the afterlife of incarceration, the afterlife, like it's alive. And that shelter poem I read, you know, during this time of COVID, there's been this increase, right, of anti-Asian, you know, racism and violence. And for a lot of us, it sort of you know, brings back that history of what happened to our community before and during, right, and the World War II era incarceration. So it's just the ways in which history changed. It's like the more I write these poems, like I see something different, I learn something new. Like it's almost like history, the past is in front of me and the present's behind me because I can't see it, but the past keeps moving in front of me and changing and revealing itself to me through both of your works, through all of this poetry folks are making about the past, bringing it into the present, making these connections to the present. And it does feel very spiritual, like Mia said. It feels like and it feels healing too. There's there's a healing happening. When I do my work with Beyonce Memory Project and I do these writing projects and we ask our elders to tell their stories and surface these memories, which can be painful, but they do it, and they do it with such grace and generosity. And you see the healing that takes place through story and through poetry. It's quite profound. Yeah. So it's wonderful to reflect on all of that today. Thank you, Brian and Jill and Mia, for this space.
Wow. I thank you, Brynn. I'm just looking at the chat. This appears to be from a family member of Mia, so maybe we'll pass it off to Mia commenting here. It says, from Mary Malhotra, she says, I'm also drawn to Brynn's idea of the non-linear experience of time. It seems to mean pain of the past is always with us, but also we don't really lose the people we love. And poetry is a way to share some of that experience across time. Thank you three for sharing today. Well, that's such a lovely comment. Mia, do you want to take that one?
I would love to. Thanks, Mom, for that comment. And I think, it's actually, this is a concept that I think, we can call it Brynn's idea, but I think we should credit like the broader bodies of wisdom that have given rise to it. There's a crazy glare happening here, sorry. But I think I actually first came up across that idea maybe through, so Mary is my mother-in-law. She has an Indian mother-in-law, so that's my grandmother-in-law, I guess. So she's Dadi to all of us. But I think she's the one that I first heard this idea. And I think it comes from, Hindu wisdom and the Hindu tradition, which is that, we care for the ancestors 7 generations back, and we are responsible for our descendants 7 generations ahead of us. And I think I was really struck when I first learned of this concept, because first of all, I thought, oh gosh, that's a lot of responsibility. But I've come to recognize this thinking in more and more traditions as I've opened myself to considering, like, what does it mean that we exist, in this sort of like sea of time, and that borrows, I think, from indigenous thought around time as like an ocean with currents, and less like a river, because I think in Western thought we think like, oh, time is a river, once you step into it once, it's gone forever, right? But what if we were to resist that a little bit, since experientially, we might not feel that way. And Mom, I remember you were looking at a painting that, so my daughter Anna, she loves painting, and so Mary was looking at a painting that Anna did the other day, and there was something about the colors, and she was like, that reminds me of the peppermints in my great grandma's house. And all of a sudden, like, we heard these incredible stories that I don't even know if my husband has heard these, and this is his like biological great. I'm getting the generations all mixed up, but isn't that kind of the way of it, right? That something like a color, can bring us right back into a home that we haven't physically stepped foot in for decades, but it still feels so alive and present to us. And how do you explain that with a river metaphor, that it's gone forever? But I agree completely that we are so much more tied to the generations before and the generations after than we may think, and that means that a lot of that is accessible to us through what's around. So I have so many more thoughts on this, but I don't want to take up too much space here. So I'll invite the others to respond or other questions.
Jill, do you want me to read the question in the chat, or do you want to read that?
Sure. Well, let me share the first comment.
Did I miss the comment? Okay.
From Marianne Villanueva.
Oh yeah. Oh
She
yeah.
says to Brian, your mother's expression in that picture with Brendan is priceless. Just the most beautiful picture of love. This was a joyous occasion, a celebration.
Okay.
Thank you for that. And then Marianne has a question for you. Do you find that the experience of being a Japanese American immigrant varies between coasts and other regions like the American South, Florida? Is there a lot of interaction between California, Japanese American poets, and other Japanese American poets in, say, the Midwest or the South? Just curious.
Well, I'll start, and then I'll hand it off maybe to Brynn, and then Brynn to Mia, or whatever order we want to go. First of all, Mariana, thank you so much. You know, Mariana is in my writing group, and Mariana Villanueva is a very accomplished novelist, and so you should check out her work. And I agree with you, Mariana, that the picture of Brendan and my mother, it really lights me up, you know, just looking at that. And you know, the smiles that they convey there are so authentic and so deep, right? There's such depth to the happiness there. In terms of, you know, the geography of Japanese American poetry, that's such an interesting, compelling question. You know, I think of, you know, the tradition of Japanese American, sort of generationally, I guess. And, you know, David Murrah, for instance, is more Midwest based, and Garrett Hongo was in kind of the Los Angeles, Hawaii. His roots are there. Janice Mirakatani is like, you know, I think of her as like San Francisco Bay Area. Lawson Yinada is like, you know, more the, what would you say, kind of like Eastern California, or this sort of, you know, I defer to Brynn. I don't know if it's Fresno is the right association for Lawson, but that's how I think of him. And so forth and so on. And, you know, one thing I do want to mention that's kind of interesting about the history before that is the ways in which Issei and Nisei, and at times Sansei, resettled. It wasn't always directly back to the West Coast. And so I think even if one was incarcerated, originally living on the West Coast, the resettlement made one's geographical associations a little more complicated, right? And so many of the writers in the anthologies Jill mentioned didn't get back to the West Coast before they stopped in Utah or Ohio, or, you know, sort of Salt Lake City, like all these sort of different places, right? And so the geography got more complex in terms of this idea of origin. And so I'll hand it off to Brynn now, but those are my initial thoughts on that great question.
Yeah, I thought about folks, we've been in community with Todd and Brandon in Arizona, you know, and the ways I mean, I don't really, yeah, I think that's a big question, but I'm finding there's, through the internet and this kind of online connection, we've started to make maybe some of these connections a little tighter between us as descendants and of survivors. So that's been fascinating, just the way that these kind of cross-country conversations are happening in this moment. And it'll be, I think, interesting to see, yeah, it'll be whatever's going to happen in the future, yeah, like post-pandemic and all of this stuff, like how will our communities coalesce and look different and be different? Yeah. Mia, did you have anything to add, or?
Yeah, I'm kind of interested by the question, actually, because the experience of being a I mean, I can't speak to that experience necessarily. I don't think of myself as an immigrant. I don't think of I mean, maybe I think of my family as being a family with immigrant roots. But I find that what distinguishes like the experience that I identify with or have come to identify with more than anything else, one, because I know there are Japanese folks coming and settling and making a home for themselves in the US, you know, all the time. But I think because of the history, you know, those who came, you know, pre-World War II or even pre-World War I, you know, back in the early 1900s, as our families did, and then experienced the incarceration. And I don't know, I find that kind of makes a marker in a way between that Japanese American immigrant experience versus maybe what's happening in a more contemporary sense. And I think there are interesting ways that the experiences may speak to each other, but the contexts are so different. So I think maybe it's a local thing, more so than a regional thing. But I may be speaking out of ignorance. I don't know. And I think whenever I do meet a Japanese American poet, this is to the second question, who lives somewhere else in the country, it's like this exciting thing for me. Like I know Christine Kitano is up in Ithaca in New York, which I guess is where we all meet each other. But it's sort of like this strange feeling of kinship across space and history, different family histories, and across geography. And I'm also curious to see what will coalesce, as you said, Brynn, in the years to come, I guess, because I think this pandemic will have a lasting impact on how we relate to one another. And I would hope that that our sense of community would grow stronger as we carry on, and isn't divided by who's in Ithaca and who's in Fresno.
Thank you, Mia. And as you two spoke, one thing that occurred to me is that even though I was born in Seattle, and then I consider the Bay Area to be just as much a home because of extended family, but my time in Michigan did inform my notion of Japanese American poetry with the history of Vincent Chin and what happened in Detroit and some of the experiences I had in Michigan. There was a much different sense of how race was constructed and how Asian Americans were viewed in my experiences in Michigan. So I think we carry place with us, right? Like Mia's poems attest to the idea of Pajaro Dunes, lives in her. And so I think that we are born, we have origins, but we also, carry place, in various ways. I did see a comment that I thought was important, and I do want to be mindful of time for the audience. I think our plan is to wrap up around 4:30, just so everyone's aware of that. We really appreciate your staying with us for this time. It's been very special. And I saw a comment. It was about, let me go up, if I can go up, Jill. It was
Um,
about writing, it was an academic perspective versus more of a,
Yeah, why don't I read it? It's from Amy
yeah.
Mass. And it says, I come from a different perspective. As a Nisei, I've been writing about the camp experience from an academic perspective. I've been in a writing group lately and realized I want to write about my experience with more feeling and with a lyrical perspective.
Yeah. Well, I'll say a few words and pass it on to my friends here. And, as I read that comment, the first thing I thought of was working with the Nisei and Sansei in the workshops that Jill and I coordinated many years ago for the anthologies. And many of those writers came in saying, I've never done creative writing. Like, how do you write a story? And some of them had done academic writing. And, what I would say is that, first of all, academic writing is more creative than one may think. That's number one. But also, I think the notion of, storytelling, it has a lot to do with trust, and it has to do with like trust in one's experience. So what I told the group day one was, actually you just have to trust in the details of your experience, and you have to learn how to render those details. So rather than rely on generalities, you know you have to kind of be able to, as a painter would, as a writer attempts to really carve out and draw from the sensory details of taste and smell and touch and setting and dialogue, what you heard, what you said, plot, right? Where you were and when, the desert, the sand, the barracks, bring these things to life. And so, I think that the idea was that many of them with little to no training then wrote these amazing stories because they simply trusted in the details of their experience. And so I have a feeling, Amy, if I have your name right, I think that that would most likely be a nice starting point for you. And it would be to think about what have you argued or asserted in your academic work, and then how could those deductive inferences or those arguments be made into narrative, right? And maybe there's a bridge. There's a bridge, like, let's say you argue that the internment is unjust. Well, then the story could then, the idea is how do you convey that injustice through details? Because what stories try to do is they attempt to move from the polemic towards more of the implied or subtle nuancing and texturing of that experience. So injustice might be the story of, being behind barbed wire and looking out and watching the mountains, and that you can't grasp or touch them. It might be the dog that you had to leave behind, like some of the Nisei and Issei and Sansei did, the pets and other cherished objects. So those are just my 2 cents, my attempt at pedagogy in about 3 minutes. So I'm going to hand it off to my fellow teacher, Brynn.
Yeah, I thought about a line by Muriel Rukeyser, a poet, and she says, our material is how we feel and how we remember. As poets, our material is how we feel. And so that impulse, Amy, to write about feeling and emotion and lyricism, you're in the space of poetry. And for me, poetry is like, you can just say anything and be anything. It's a space of total freedom. I think that's why I came to poetry, and so many of us come to poetry. It was my space to be free. It was a practice of freedom, a freedom practice, for me. I think if anyone in the audience, anyone today, to write about feeling and emotion and sense and detail and memory, and to do that however you want, that's poetry. And doing that and making that space it changes your life. It can be life changing, right? And this is some of the work we do in the classroom, and we do in Beyonce Memory Project, right, with our community and our elders, is bringing poetry to the community. Poetry doesn't just live in the academy, it belongs to all of us. We're all poets. I believe that. Like, that's part of my underlying assumption, is we all have poetry in us. So yes, write poetry. I'll pass it to Mia.
Thanks. Yeah, I was gonna jump in with another thought, actually, which is that the academic perspective is, something that's probably open to a little bit of invitation, because who says that the academic perspective is the dry, factual, disembodied, like, I'm pushing on that a little bit, because I know there are other modes, there are alternative modes like testimonial, I'm thinking, the anthology is escaping me, but there's this anthology that was put together by these Chicana, like, mother scholars, and I think mother scholar is somewhere in the title. Anyway, but they're positing this alternative form of academic work, which privileges, importantly, embodied experience, lived experience. I don't know. I think there are ways that doing work, Amy, that you feel drawn to do, like, there are people doing this in pockets of academia, and academia will be better for it, because there's something that needs to be dismantled, is my sense, and who's going to dismantle it, but folks like you and folks like us, who are kind of rallied around, especially with the wisdom and the insight and the lived experience that you can bear testimony to. I'm dying to read what you have to say and to write.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Mia, and really resonates with what I was saying at the beginning, this idea that academic writing is creative, right? And so I'm constantly working with my students who are in this idea of logos. And I said, there's pathos. You know, in order for someone to care about your academic work, you have to figure out pathos. What is the emotional appeal of the argument? And a lot of times it has to do with humanizing the argument. And how do you do that? Through testimonials, through anecdotes, through narratives, right? And so I agree with you. There's sort of a false binary between the academic and creative. Look at Gloria Anzaldua's How to Tame a Wild Tongue, and you'll see a new way of doing literary criticism or cultural criticism or whatever you want to call that. So, you know, community group, family, friends, you know, I think I'll wrap up with a few comments, and I want to look at the chat, and then we can leave it to Jill. And, you know, if Brynn and Mia, you two want to also close too, that would be great. But I just want to say that in the chat here, Brandon Shimoda has mentioned the, I don't know what to call it. Speaking of non-genres, you know, it's a nonfiction, creative nonfiction essay that Brandon wrote, but it includes our poems that we wrote based upon not being able to gather. So there's the link to that. And Brynn has put the letter exchange with her father, and there's some other letters in that exchange. Thank you, Mariana, for the follow-up comments about Vincent Chin. And, you know, Jill, I think you could talk about the East Wind Bookstore. I'll leave that to you about where to buy the books. And so I guess, Jill, before you do that, just a few quick closing comments from me would be, just gratitude, domo arigato gozaimashita, to all of you for being here today. I told Brynn and Mia, this is such a special event for me personally because of the obvious connections between all of us, but having you all here has been very, very special as well, and something that we won't forget. I'm really glad that this is being recorded so that hopefully you all can share it with other family and friends who were not able to make it today. And so just, we appreciate you all being able to be with us to create this space today. Your presence has really been essential to the sense of a warmth and a familial communal reading that is very unusual, actually, and something that I've cherished today. Brynn.
I'll just say thank you as well, and thank you to Jill and J-Sei and Mia, and finally Brian. Really, your book is what brought us together here today, and it's a remarkable book. So I hope everyone enjoys, you know, reading that book. And yeah, just gratitude. Thank you.
I echo everything. Jill, thank you. And J-Sei, you've been a hero, I think, of this pandemic and bringing the community together through just a really challenging time. So I'm grateful to you for keeping us all organized and on track.
So there's many more thanks people are sharing, and while they're doing that, I'm going to just put up just some end screens and then invite people. What we do at the end of our programs is people like to say hello, so I'll invite us to go into gallery view. But first I wanted to just give a shout out to East Wind Books. They've been really our collaborator during the pandemic as you know, bookseller, independent bookstore locally, and they have all three of the books that we shared on screen with you. So Brian's book Seize, and Mia's book Isako, and Brynn's book Power Made Us Swoon. So please think of Eastwind Books if you want to purchase them, and you can do a curbside pickup, or if you want, they can drop it off at J-Sei for those of you who are frequent stopper buys, and they'd be happy to drop it off, because sometimes getting to downtown Berkeley is a little challenging, especially with the construction going on. So that's asiabookcenter.com. And then I want to give a shout out for some upcoming events. We're having another series of talks on Sunday afternoons, starting in 2 weeks, March 7th at 4 p.m. And it's a series of intergenerational conversations for Nikkei in the who are LGBTQ. The first topic is on lessons from 2 pandemics, looking at AIDS and COVID-19. The second panel is on the frontiers of gender identity. And that's Sunday, March 21st. And the third one is perspectives, queerness, ethnicity, and gender in the arts. And that's in April, Sunday, April 18th. And you can see more information on our website, www.jsei.org. And then also, for those of you who I have on our RSVP list, I'll send a list of links to the poems that were read by the poets. And if you are not on my RSVP, then go ahead and put your email in the chat and I will send it to you as well. So if you don't have the books, we are happy to share the poems that were shared today. So now I think I'm going to take you guys off of, you can all go into gallery view, Brynn and Ryan and me, and you can say hello to folks.
Okay, thank you for being here. Mom and Dad, sending love to you in Seattle. Brynn and Mia. Hey, Lillian. Hugs to you, Lillian. Grace, hugs to you. Great reading. That was like 3 days ago, Lillian and Grace.
Thanks
Brandon,
so much.
there's Brandon. Wow, thanks so much for being here, Brandon. I hope it's not over 100 degrees in Arizona right now. No?
It's not, no.
Okay.
It's so wonderful to listen to the three of you.
Oh,
What a gift.
yeah, thank you, Brandon. We really hope to have our reunion of all 5 of us at some point in the near future.
Yeah, it's a dream.
Yeah. And thank you for putting the afterlife in the chat too, my friend.
Oh yeah, of course.
Everyone, you need to read the poems of Brandon Shimoda and his book, The Grave on the Wall, as well. Please. Brynn, who of your family's here?
I see my uncle and auntie, I see Pat and Jean, I see Jerry and Marilyn.
Okay.
And a possible Dave.
Dave, reveal yourself, Dave.
It's nice to see and my mom, of course, Janelle and Greg, my dad, and then folks on the writing group, Mariana, Lillian, Grace. Oh my
Hey,
gosh,
Mariana.
so nice to see you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, we miss you, Brynn. Great to see you and to meet Mia, and great reading.
This is great. And Brandon, of course, Brandon and I, it's like some of these folks I've been corresponding with for years, and I don't even think we've seen each other on Zoom before, Brandon. It's like a first.
I know, what a way to begin.
You haven't met Brynn? This is the first time?
Yeah.
Oh. Wait, Brandon, have you met Mia? Have you and Mia met?
I haven't met anyone.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, DC was going to be the big inaugural.
Oh wow. Okay.
But
Well,
in a way, this is really cool because Brandon, you're meeting all the family. My parents, my parents-in-law, they're all here.
is that the Perry Sakai window? Those are your no.
Perry and Audrey are my parents.
Oh,
And
okay.
Mary and Sean.
All right.
They've adopted me.
Aww.
I want to give a shout out to Grace, and behind her you can see the little dog is Teddy, her dad's dog.
Yeah.
And Grace wrote a beautiful story that was in an anthology of a series that I'm on the board of, the Misaligned series. And welcome Grace and Teddy there.
Actually, a coincidence is that the first time I read that story was when our group 17 syllables read at J-Sei, I think 3 years ago.
That's right. That's right. You know, for those of us, Brian and Grace, Mariana, and I are all in a group that Brian and I and a few others were the original founders, but of course, you know, Brynn was part of it. There's some amazing people that are kind of honorary members, and we founded it now 21 years ago.
Yep. Yeah.
So we'll have to celebrate that with everybody, and
Oh,
and
goodness.
have some, and also then also celebrate Brynn's wedding, like a shout out to her. Congratulations.
Do we know, is that Dave, Brynn? Have we identified Dave?
Still being mysterious.
I don't know. He might be working and,
Oh,
and kind of popping in and out. I don't know.
All
Maybe
right.
Marilyn can text him.
Okay.
I wanted to meet your mother because, you know, Niten-san came to my family's home for my grandfather's memorials the whole time I was growing up. She's not there now.
Mom, where'd you go? Hey,
Where's that?
Dad, can you unmute your mic, Dad? This is always an adventure. It's always an
Here they
adventure.
are.
Okay.
Mom and Dad, Kay wants to meet you. And
Yes.
so
Niten-san came to my family's home all the time I was growing up for my grandfather's memorial. So I have this real image of Niten-san and his, and those robes got older, you know, I mean, they the last time I saw them, they were pretty frayed.
Yeah.
So Mom, come on, you need to say a few things here. What are your thoughts, Mom? I know you weren't.
Wow, I'm really amazed of the connection.
Well,
Your cover is so beautiful.
Oh, thank
Of
you.
seeing that artwork is just gorgeous and deeply moving.
yeah, Lillian, you know, one of my goals in the next year is to set up a website for my mother and her paintings. And actually behind my father and her are some of her paintings.
Mhm.
I don't know how well you can see them. My mom is so talented.
They're gorgeous.
And she's too modest, right? She's like, oh, you know, website's too much trouble. No.
No, website soon. Yes.
So,
That's when she started back into painting in 1994. So it's got
Wow.
quite an array. of
Beautiful.
time.
Mom, where'd you go?
Here.
So how are you guys doing, Mom and Dad, out in Seattle? Things okay?
Yeah,
Beautiful readings.
beautiful
Just- it was
readings.
really
Very
touching.
poignant. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
special.
Thank you for being here. Well, Ruth, how are you? Ruth Ichinaga is she's on the Collecting Nisei Stories website. And for the earlier query from Amy, the academic writer, I think Ruth wrote some beautiful work for the website. And she's a dancer too, right, Ruth?
I try. Yes,
Which was
but I loved having a chance to write, and I was thinking I'd like to take another class again because, you know, I don't write by myself. I just need the prompts that just having you read the writings that I've done. So
Yeah.
I really miss that. That was really fun. Thank you.
Oh. Well, that's another part of it, right? Is finding mentorship in community is so important in the writing process. As you can see from today's event, is testament to that, right?
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Brynn, do you think your parents wanna? I don't think I've ever met your parents, Brynn.
I know my mom is very shy on the
Aw.
Zoom, so I don't think she might have even. Yeah, I think she shut her
You
camera.
log off.
Okay. Oh, Dave, reveal yourself, Dave.
He's probably working right now. It's okay.
Okay.
Really, I do have a husband named Dave. Marilyn and Jerry.
Hey, he's
can attest-
there. He's there.
Yeah, they can attest to this. My in-laws can attest. But Yeah, this is really
Okay.
sweet. It's so fun to just connect with everybody. It's very sweet.
Jill, thank you so much to you and J-Sei.
Oh, you're welcome. And I want to introduce Jonathan, who's on the call. So Jonathan is one of the writers that Grace Morizawa teaches a writing
Oh, yes.
class.
Yes.
And Jonathan, can you unmute yourself? And I
Welcome,
think
Jonathan.
there's been an increase in students during the pandemic, and just in terms of the volume of writing that's coming out has been really amazing. So I wonder, Jonathan, if you can unmute and tell us about that a little bit.
Yes, well, welcome, Jonathan. And I know that Grace Morizawa has often used Wakako Yamauchi's writing in her classes.
Yeah, so Grace has been a real kind of catalyst for a lot of us to write about, our experiences, and just not only technique, but just to tap into our sort of experiences. So it's been a nice journey for me. I mean, I've been doing it for a couple of years now, and it's amazing what you can tap into in terms of your experience, yeah, and your memory. And I find that I sort of signed up for the class because I wanted to write stories about family photos, but just to make them a little bit more interesting. But it turns out that I've enjoyed just kind of writing fiction, which has been kind of a very unlikely turn of events. So yeah, it's been fun.
Thank you, Jonathan. I don't mean to put you on the spot. Your last name is Hirabayashi. Are you related to?
I'm not related to the famous Hirabayashis. Yeah, I got to work with James Hirabayashi, who's Gordon's brother, a few years ago, long time ago actually, and we concluded that we were not even remotely related.
Maybe some sort of kinship of some sort,
well,
somehow.
Hirabayashi means flat forest, and I guess there's a bunch of flat forests in Japan, so we just happen to be located in different flat forests.
Thank you so much for illuminating that. And thank you for being in Grace Morizawa's writing class.
Oh yeah, well, I have to thank Grace for that. Yeah, she's been very, very generous with her time,
Lillian, what are you writing now? What are you working on?
I'm working on a number of things. I'm on the sixth draft of a novel, which is kind of the companion piece to the novel, The Charm Buyers. I'm still not quite happy with it, but I'm also working on a version, an adaptation of A Christmas Carol set in Tahiti. And yes, kind of like playing around with that image and having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, and The Charm Buyers definitely needs to be made into a movie if that's not happening yet. So if any of you know any movie producers that deserves that.
Maybe
Thank you,
Netflix serial. That would be
cool.
cool.
There's some great indie movies on Netflix. I agree. And it's just so great to see everybody. And I have to be so thankful to Jill and J-Sei for always stepping up and hosting these events.
Well, we're fortunate to have such talent in our midst. So thank you for sharing it.
Well, everyone, my childcare will be leaving soon. And it was Brandon, it was so lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for being here, Brandon. Jonathan, continue to write, please. Kay, great to see you. Marilyn, thank you for coming. Ruth, you need to keep dancing and writing. And Mia, I think I just saw some of your family left, but hugs to Mariana and Lillian and Grace. And Dave, okay.
And also to the parents of Brian there.
Of course, big love to my parents, and thank you to Brynn's parents for being here, and to Mia's family. I know a lot of family members. Who's J-Sei Slides? I'm not sure who that is, but
Oh, sorry, that was my other screen for the slideshow.
okay.
That's just me.
So, but I do want to also thank Jill Shiraki, of course, just for everything she does, you know, for J-Sei, for the community, for us as, you know, friends. And so Jill, very special event. And I'm so glad that we recorded it, honestly, because it is really not just of literary value, but of sentimental value for me, and I'm sure for all of us. So Brynn and Mia, sisters, you're amazing.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks, everybody.
So Jill, do we all just kind of wave and do
wave and I can let you go. Be released.
Congrats on the book, Brian.
Hey, Brandon, thank you so much. Congrats on all your...
Brian's book is brilliant.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, love to you all. Virtual hugs. Stay safe.